All right, David, just giving you a little bit of feedback here from our coaching session. We're really looking at a couple of those body alignment, hand position aspects, ultimately getting you to a point where you can actually set up to the golf ball and feel quite uncomfortable. A couple of things that I'm going to just play out here. I'm going to get rid of this body lines feature, but we're just going to watch the way the golf club moves back. And ultimately, as you transition, we're just watching, we're just paying attention to the way that you route the club and control the golf club. So we'll make some general assessments to your swing plane. The golf club basically is moving away from you. The club moves up the shaft plane to the elbow plane, to the shoulder plane, back to the elbow plane. You should produce a lot of left to right golf shots with this type of overall motion. Now, let's get into a couple things that I think will be quite helpful for you. I'm going to get away from a couple of these planes, the shoulder plane and the elbow plane. I am going to focus in on what we're doing from a pelvis perspective. So we'll stop at the very top, and when we stop at the very top, we do notice in this particular case 55 plus degrees of pelvis rotation. You can see that from a couple different vantage points. Now if we factor that into your rib cage or your torso rotation, obviously 97 degrees of rib cage torso rotation while the pelvis is rotating much less, which is actually quite ideal. I challenged you to get your pelvis rotation to feel a little bit delayed, and obviously the goal is to get your pelvis to rotate a little bit more efficiently, which means that pelvis rotation number at the actual top of the backswing should be ideally a little bit more like 35, 45 degrees. So a couple things that we look at is how does a player transition? So we're going to go from face on. Now, how do you transition from the top of the swing to the downswing? So we get into mid down. We've got 7 degrees of rotation with the pelvis. You get all the way to impact. You're now at 22 degrees of rotation with your pelvis. So again, looking at it from this perspective, the lower body is getting out of the way. The upper body is a lot more square, feeling like you're a little bit more closed, specifically after we work on some of those setup aspects that we discussed during our coaching session. So I'm going to take this all the way through. We'll just hit play. And I'm going to go face on, and I'm going to pause this. And I'm going to throw one thing at you here. And for the most part, I guess a couple things that we can consider, but for the most part, I'm going to pay really close attention to the pelvis. When you move the golf club back to mid-back, which is a club that is parallel to the ground, it's okay to have some sway. Now, the more that you sway, the more you have to slide back into position so that you can time the face moving into the back of the golf ball. So we'll look at this. As the golf club moves up, we do see at the very top of the golf swing, the shoulders, the rib cage, the pelvis, everything's minimally moving to your right. Again, from your perspective, everything is minimally moving. Shoulders sway, rib cage sway, pelvis sway. From top to bottom, it moves slightly to the right. Now, talking about thrust, it's pretty interesting to watch the thrust. The thrusting in this case, if we take this back to mid-back, I want you to watch the shoulders and the rib cage and the pelvis. Now you can see the direction that they're moving. So in the case now where the club is moving down to contact, right there at mid-down, and there's some pelvis sway as we again jump to the face-on view. But you basically have to throw your body into side bend. And when I say body, you have to throw your upper body into side bend to allow for the club to shallow out. So if I jump to the club data, I'm going to look at, we first started and the path was excessively in to out, and the angle of attack was 2 degrees on the down. So it was starting to really level itself out down through impact. Ideally at impact, I'd like to see at least the pelvis be directly below the rib cage. I know that most players are going to back out of a shot, which means they're going to go into right side bend, which is what you've done right there. But in all reality, like we addressed through the training, we have to work on the address condition improvements first, and that allows us to physically get you set up to the golf ball in a better fashion, and then ultimately you can move more effectively. But it all comes down to feeling like the pelvis, again, if we go back to some of the visuals that we discussed earlier, the pelvis turn at mid-back and then moving from mid-back to the top of the swing, I would want you to feel a little bit of a slight delay in turning the pelvis so you don't have such an aggressive turn of the pelvis to assist the club moving up. And I think that's what throws off a lot of the dynamics in your body mechanics, and it throws you into a side bend to shallow out the club. And that basically causes some swing path issues, which is why your swing path gets a little bit too far out to the right and you are too pronounced with an in to out path. But looking at this, I think we've got some pretty good stuff. This is the beginning of our coaching session, and you made some really, really big strides, which I will focus in on in the next video lesson with some voiceover that I will send your way. If you have any questions about the beginning of our coaching session, please feel free to reach out to me, use me as a resource. And I really enjoyed having you at 18 Shots.